everyone. As Michelle said, my name is Emanuel Arora, and I am one of the enforcement attorneys here at ReliabilityFirst. And today we are going to be discussing a brief recap of everything enforcement from 2024. Next slide, please. So this is the agenda for today's enforcement recap. The following slides include data relating to some key enforcement metrics that ReliabilityFirst tracks that we think is important to share as far as our violation intake, dispositions processed, and what our open inventory looks like, with also some key takeaways as we near the end of 2024. And I'll also discuss some of the outreach our enforcement team has done throughout the year as well. Next slide, please. So this graph is showing annual intake of cases reported, and this 2024 number is as of last week, since we're not all the way through December quite yet. And if you read our Enforcement Explained that came out, I believe early last week, this chart looks a little bit different for the 2024 number because it's more recently updated as of last week instead of November. So it's increased just a bit since then. But the data shows that violation intake is down from prior years, but still does remain high. As expected, an overwhelming majority of the violations were self-reported or self-logged, as opposed to identified through a RF compliance monitoring engagement. And also, as expected, a majority of them are in the SIP space. So there's no surprise at all that there's a lot of our annual intake that consists of potential non-compliances with our high frequency standards like SIP 4, SIP 10, those are expected. But for those of you who saw our 2024 SIP themes report, if not, I highly recommend, but it outlines our areas for improvement for our entities based on trends we're seeing across the ERO. It also includes examples of the types of concerning conduct at issue, which is a notable piece of ReliabilityFirst 2024 intake. One of the themes that is discussed in that report is performance drift or complacency or otherwise losing sight of the purpose of performing a physical security task or viewing them as an impediment to their job. Our SIP 6.6 R2 visitor control inventory has more than doubled. So we have 14 reports from 2023, and this year so far, we already have over 30. Some examples and trends of what we're seeing in that space: construction and maintenance crews, propping doors, allowing piggybacking, loss of visual contact, unescorted visitors, or incompletes and inaccurate logs. Another theme that is discussed in that report is the insufficient commitment to low impact programs. As for our SIP 3.8 R2 inventory, we have 15 so far this year. Some examples of what we're seeing in that space is a lack of awareness of the full scope of the obligations, such as an incomplete cybersecurity plan, insufficient implementation of plans to mitigate risk associated with transient cyber assets and removable media, and also insufficient physical security controls, such as unsecure doors and failure to adhere to access protocols. Now, because we have seen an uptick in volume of those violations in the low impact space, many with similar fact patterns and root causes, RF has been performing lots of outreach on how to develop and execute successful SIP 3 programs. Just beyond our traditional CMEP activities, we have resources available. Our entity engagement team is always available for assist visits, and we also are currently sharing Lou Folker's multi-part Lighthouse series on SIP low impact programs from the ground up through our newsletters. It's a huge resource for our entities facing these issues. It's, I think, a 16-part series designed to assist entities in developing all components of a SIP 3 program. So all in all, we have a lot of resources available to help on that front. And those are just two SIP theme examples that remind us of the importance of the cybersecurity risks our entities are facing. And it's just a quick snapshot of what our violation intake looks like throughout the years. Next slide, please. As you can see, the team in enforcement has processed over 400 violations this year alone, and we're still counting as we have a couple weeks left of December. We went into this year with a similar focus as we did in 2023, which was processing our older inventory, such as the 2021 and 2021, or I'm sorry, 2020 and 2021 cases in our high risk areas like access provisioning and revocation, protecting BES cyber system information, managing electronic security perimeters, and protection system maintenance and testing. And regarding the violations that we processed and filed in 2024, most were lower risk violations. About 87% have been processed as compliance exceptions or fine, fix, and track reports. And also, as expected, a majority of them were SIP. Next slide, please. So regarding violations remaining in ReliabilityFirst inventory, the vast majority are considered relatively new, with about 86% of those violations identified and submitted in 2023 and 2024, about 13 identified in 2022, 13%, and less than 1% identified in 2021. I think this is my favorite slide. It's kind of like that meme trend on the internet of how it started versus how it's going, right? I love it because it really shows all the progress we've made on our older inventory that we've been telling you the past year or so has been our focus. You can see on the right chart our intake for each year and what we have left right now. So 438 submissions in 2020, there's none left on the books. We have only 6 out of 412 for 2021 left, and that number will hopefully be 0 soon in 2025. And our 2022 intake was a record, 532 submissions, and we took a big chunk out of that this year. So if you're wondering what we've been doing, this is just it. In enforcement, we are often asked by our entities how soon cases can close once they are self-reported, and we acknowledge that entities want these processed very quickly. We hear you loud and clear, and trust me, ReliabilityFirst does not want these cases and lots of open inventory on our books either. And this graph shows that we've made considerable dents in our older inventory as we've been focusing on that aging inventory the past couple of years, especially when comparing it to that chart on the right. So it's been a multi-year march to get to this point. And I will just note that because a case is open doesn't mean it's inactive. So even if it was just recently reported a week ago, at ReliabilityFirst, we have instituted more robust upfront case processing and triage procedures this past year, so that when those cases come in, we're ensuring they are looked at sometimes within a few weeks to a few months. They're projected on a disposition path to the extent that we have enough information to make an informed projection. And we send RFIs on any open issues we've identified so that entities aren't getting a first round of RFIs 2 years after the self-report was submitted. So those are some things that we've put in place the past year that we think have really helped us out a lot. And as we head into 2025, we will continue to prioritize closing out what we now consider the older inventory, those last few 2021 cases that remain, the 2022s, and making a big dent in our 2023 inventory. And we're at a point now that we're starting to close newer cases on a relatively quicker timeline, especially those lower risk issues based on us closing out so much older inventory the past few years. Next slide, please. So for outreach, we have done a lot of targeted one-on-one outreach with our entities throughout the year. We've done self-reporting, best practice presentations, and workshops with our entities. Bridget Sacento presented at our NERC annual CMEP workshop in the spring. We've had many SIP themes presentations throughout the year. Tom Scanlon presented SIP themes at CERC's Fall Reliability and Security Seminar. Mike Hattery presented it at WIC's Reliability and Security Workshop. Our case managers are constantly attending conferences throughout the year, especially for the EBA. Max Reisinger presented at EBA's 2024 Midwest Chapter annual meeting. And of course, we're always at our fall workshop with some representation there so we could see some of our entities. We've released a lot of valuable material throughout the year as well. In RF's most recent Enforcement Explained, Mike Hattery covers a lot of the data that we're actually discussing here today with RF's enforcement trends, And there's some really great previous articles in there on self-reporting, vendor access issues. So if you go to our website, you could check those out as well. And going into 2025, we are tracking still the data that we covered here today. And through that, we are going to identify even more targeted outreach with our registered entities. And also we're working on mitigation strategies as well with our entities. And this is just a very, very high level overview of the trends and issues our enforcement team is exploring. As always, please reach out if you have any questions or if you have any suggested topics for us to consider. And for our registered entities here, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to your case managers. That is what we're here for. Next slide, please. And that's it from me.
Thank you, Elizabeth. A lot of great work has been done throughout the year to get these cases closed. We do have a few questions that came in, questions on your presentation. So the first one is, do we anticipate intake going up as it has been an active year with new standards being implemented plus registering new entities? Do you anticipate intake going up?
Yeah, it's hard to say. I think that the past few years, it's been pretty consistent around that high 300 mark. Right now, we're at 328. I think we'll get a smaller chunk coming in, so we'll probably land a little bit closer to how 2023 was this past year. But it's fair to say that with new standards coming in, that there's still a learning curve associated with those. So it very well could be, but hopefully not too much more.
Great, thank you. The next question here is, what can industry do to help close out cases efficiently? So what information do you need from entities to help you maybe get through the process a little bit faster?
Yeah, it all starts with that first submission, right? So typically things are self-reported. So having a really thoughtful self-report that covers the essentials of like who, what, where, why, when, right? And those types of things, asset counts, classifications, all of that, dates being correct as far as start and end dates, root causes, making sure your mitigation tracks and your mitigating activities tracks and corrects the root causes, and you have remediation milestones. Really going back to the basics of what should be in a self-report is critical. There are lots of times that we could read a self-report, and if it has everything we need, we know that that one can get processed really quick. But when we have to send out RFIs, it just does take a little bit more time and kind of drags things out more. So being really thoughtful in that initial submission and making sure that entities are completing things, and providing thoughtful, meaningful mitigating factors and risk analysis too. Every part of the self-report is in there for a reason because it's really important. So if we're missing parts of the self-report or critical information, then you're going to get RFIs on it. So that's what I would say is really focusing on getting a thoughtful self-report submitted.
Great. Next question here, Elizabeth. What are some of the possible reasons why a case takes multi-years to be closed? Is it a long mitigation plan or the complexity of the issue? Can you provide any insight on that?
Sure. So for the past few years, it was just a matter of prioritizing that older inventory. When we've identified cases that we know are complete, like I just said, the self-report basically kind of covers everything you need. We try to move those along quicker, so that certainly helps. But moving through this older inventory was huge. So now that we can get on a better pace as newer inventory comes in. And also just some are higher risk issues and they just can't be, they take more work. They're very complex. Sometimes the mitigation is ongoing for years. So no case really is ever the same. And I would say those complex cases really they just do take longer. But I think the older inventory being a big part of it was it. But you'll see the 2022s are going to be a high priority for us this year. We're going to take a giant chunk out of that number, as well as 2023. So if your violation IDs are 2022s and 2023s, you'll see a lot of progress coming up in 2025 on those.
Great. Okay, next question. If I don't know who my case manager is, who should I ask?
You can ask any one of us. So you can reach out to, Brian or Michelle on this call, and we can make sure that's identified. We have a ton of resources here for you. I would hope, I would think someone there has to know who your case manager is, but give us a call, shoot me an email. My email's right there. So if anyone really can't find the information that they need, please feel free to reach out. We have lots of resources here, and someone will definitely make sure that you are connected with your case manager. It's so important. We love hearing from you. That's what we're here for, is making sure that you have everything you need. If you're getting questions on RFIs and you don't know what it means, reach out to us. We don't want anyone sitting there trying to interpret things or second guessing themselves. And sometimes that can hold up the process too and delay things even further. So pick up the phone, shoot us an email. But if you don't know who your case manager is, shoot me an email right there, and I'd be happy to help you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Next question. If I have an upcoming audit and I identify a problem, should I tell my ATL or should I call my case manager, or both?
It can't hurt to tell both. I don't know, where you might be in the audit process and things like that, but it's always just good to communicate that, and your ATL and your case manager can even work together to give you some better guidance on that.
Fantastic, thanks. And this is the last question, Elizabeth, so we got through these pretty quick. Any thought that, given the number of requirements and challenges to standards, that there is a floor below which intake won't ever go? Maybe 300 is the minimum. Any thoughts on that?
I don't want to speculate, but I don't know. There's a lot of work being done in that space. It's very thoughtful work. I don't want to put a number on it. I don't think I can. But I think it's a fair question. It's a fair thought. I just think that we're all doing really meaningful work and that we're getting to a good place. I think that the inventory, again, is still, it's down from prior years for us, for example, but it still remains high. So there's still a lot of work to do, and I think that we're only getting better each year, and the standards are only getting better each year. So
great, thank you so much. And that was the last